Hey kids, how you doing? This is Ivan. Not about you, but I'm kind of a science buff. When I was a kid, I really wanted to be a paleontologist, and then it was an entomologist, and I was really interested in astronomy and what have you. And as time went on in my life, I got interested in things like chemistry and physics and particle physics and all that sort of stuff. And so I really kind of devoured, quite a few books about that, and really just researched it. And just, it was fun. You read about what you're interested in, and if you look at my library, you'll find that it's probably over half nonfiction, just various subjects, and if what I took out of the library, what I've read, a lot of that sort of stuff too. It's funny because I did that to the exclusion of things like history. So sometimes that can be a detriment. This video really isn't really about that at all, but I notice that can be a bit of a detriment to me. Like when I play various role-playing games or looking at them, a lot of times I'm unaware of certain parts of history. So I kind of struggle to make up for that. But this really isn't about that at all. It's about kind of getting over the hump of the learning curve. And what happened, I'm sitting around surrounded by books, some of my Ubiquity game books, learning some of these nuances of all these different systems. And this is all kind of prompted by the fact that Runeslinger, Anthony's going to be a player in our All-for-One Regime Diabolique game now. And so he kind of introduced his character to us in our little private Facebook group. So his character Martin is going to have the magical aptitude talent, and he kind of was given this little cheat sheet he's used before for All for One, and just how to make magic a little bit easier. And as he lists out the entire formula, what you have to do in these various complications, the base difficulty, it doesn't sound so easy, and he's simplifying a little bit. And I know it's easy when it comes right down to it, but looking at it for a second, my eyes start to glaze over. I had a similar experience when I reading this book, which is great. The guides too. I have to talk about these at some point. But there's a point in here where I realized that I had not, really read in detail and really kind of, wrapped my head around some of the nuances of Leagues of Adventure when it comes down to things like layers and weird science, because I was coming up with things here where there's going to be enhancements and attributes of layers and little devices in there. I realized I was starting to not make sense to me, and I realized I have to go back and take a look at that sort of stuff again. So, at some point in any game, in any endeavor, I'll have that moment where I'm like wondering, is it really worth it for me to put the effort into this? Because as I was looking at the magic system of something like All for One, the first time I looked at the magic system in Desolation, when I'm looking at these terms, I obviously missed because when I looked over at Leagues of Adventure, which is a great game, I'm really not sure what I'm going to do with it yet. But I kind of glossed over the things and read them once, but realized I didn't quite digest it yet. And so for me, this is more of a psychological thing for me. And I was thinking about the video I made to Robert, the narrator, at one point when he said, our D&D grognard's the grognardiest of them all. And I kind of gave him my take. I don't believe that's so, and I'll link that video as well, just for the heck of it. But part of it was, for me, my reluctance to learn new games is that, I already know how to play that one. I already know how to play whatever games I know how to play. I already know how to play them. What's the cost-benefit analysis? What's my return on investment of learning a new game going to be? And I've had times when the return on investment wasn't that great. I found out that things like D20, things like Pathfinder and all that kind of junk, they're not for me. But there was an investment I put into it in terms of time and learning the system. And then I realized it just wasn't panning out for me. I don't think that's going to be the case here. And I understand, too, in something like the Ubiquity magic system, for like All for One, which just takes a while to kind of wrap your head around. It's one of those things you kind of have to learn by doing. You can conceptualize it and understand it. The same thing with stuff here about, like, how to stat out things like, a mummy's lair or the traps in there. It's something you have to do a few times before you really get good at it, and then it becomes more natural. But in the meantime, before that happens, I don't know if you read anything about chemistry, but there's this energy of activation in any kind of chemical reaction where if you look at the little graph, and maybe I'll even link the Wikipedia page so you understand what that means if you're not quite sure. Any chemical reaction, you're going to go from energy level of this, if it's certain types of reactions, to a higher energy level. But in order to get yourself there, in order to start the reaction, you need to put a certain amount of energy in. And then this could be just so simple as lighting a fire. You need to light that match. You need to come up with a fantastic amount of energy first. Light the kindling on fire. Next thing you get a lot of energy released. But you have to put some energy in there that wasn't there before. You have to make some effort. And sometimes that can be a stumbling block for me. I was thinking about it today as I was doing other stuff, and part of that probably, if you wanted this kind of this much insight into my psyche, was the fact that I ran into that as a kid. I was I'm not a genius, but I was relatively smart, and I finally got to that point. I couldn't tell you what grade it was, somewhere probably in junior high school, where all of a sudden I realized I was going to have to make some effort, and I really had never had to before, and that was kind of shocking. And as a result, I didn't apply myself as much as I should have, because it was a little weird, to be quite honest with you. And don't shed any tears for me, but there was this idea that is this really going to be worth it for me to put this kind of effort in there, because I was used to things coming a little bit easier. And so when I run into things like that in a game, like I would tell you that 95% of All for One real easy, just kind of get it right off the bat. In terms of the magic system and how you're actually going to set difficulties, because it is free form, so it's part creativity, it's part art, it's part science, it's part learning the rules, but it's not as simple as playing something like Dungeons and Dragons, where this is how you cast a fireball, this is what happens. But I have to put a little bit more effort into it. The benefit at the end of the day is you can do a lot of stuff with it. But it's putting that activation energy in at the front end, putting the effort in to really learn the system. And so that is something that probably makes me a little bit more of I don't want to say a grognard, but stops me from learning other games, and I have to overcome that internal reluctance to put a little effort in it. Is this going to be, am I going to, get enjoyment out of this? Is the return on my investment going to be worth it? So that's just kind of a little ramble today as I was thinking about all those sorts of things. But I'd love to hear your experience with this. Is that something you've never struggled with? Is that something that you struggle with all the time when you learn new games? Is that something that keeps you from learning new games? I was thinking about, I thought I was done. I was thinking about this today also. Part of the bummer is when you get yourself all wrapped up in a new game. And Robert, the narrator, has talked about this more than once. And I get myself all psyched up, and I really want to run, let's say, a Leagues of Gothic horror game, which I really do. That's kind of what I want to do with Leagues of Adventure. Then, after putting the effort in myself, now I have to kind of recruit some other people, not just get them interested in it, but then get them to learn it. Maybe not to the same extent that I've learned it, but get them to learn it. Once again, more activation energy. Because I know at the end it'll be pretty cool, but a lot of effort in the front end. So, like I was trying to say before, what's your experience been with all this? I'd love to hear it. And what's your take?